Please consider supporting Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. You can learn more about them at bwunited.ca. They are always looking for donations and volunteers. So please, again, support Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. Again, that website is bwunited.ca.
Hey, this is Trevor from Halifax, calling in to say that I support Creative Control on Patreon because I think long-form arts journalism is a crucial part of music culture, and there's simply not enough of it out there today. Vish is a master interviewer, he lands great guests, and he has his finger on the pulse of the ever-changing music landscape, both here in Canada and abroad. For all of these reasons and many more, I think you should support Creative Control on Patreon too.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control today. I'm Visha's wife, and I will love him no matter what you do. And now he has me on the record saying that.
Thurston Moore is a hugely influential American musician and songwriter who originally hails from New York City. Currently based in London, England, Moore is a co-founder of the band Sonic Youth, which towered over underground rock music between 1981 and their final show to date in 2011. For his part, Moore has been rather prolific in his solo pursuits, and 2020 has thus far seen the release of a wondrous new full band effort called By the Fire, which is out now via Daydream Library, an imprint that Moore co-founded. Thurston and I connected recently for a good chat about the work he's been preoccupied with during pandemic-induced isolation, the infinite joy provided by musical discovery, and the great loss we're all experiencing by not seeing unknown opening bands at shows these days, the blurry line between mainstream and underground culture, the 25th anniversary of the album Washing Machine, and the ongoing Sonic Youth Live series, future plans, and more. A part of the Entertainment One Network with the support of listeners like you who follow and subscribe to this podcast and spread the word about it and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/Creative Control, and Massey Hall's concert film series live at masseyhall.com, where you can stream dozens of 30-minute films for free, including performances by past podcast guests like Chad Van Galen, plus in-kind support from Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton. This is the 577th episode of Creative Control, featuring the thoughtful and talented Thurston Moore, with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Hi, Thurston. How's it going?
Going very well. How are you?
I'm not bad. First of all, where in the world are you?
I am in London, the United Kingdom.
How are things going? Thanks for being specific. I like that. I like geographic lessons. How are things going there?
Well, they're just separating the island from the rest of the European Union. So if people are kind of shaky and falling over each other, it's going all right. I mean, like everybody else in the world, it's just like a big question mark about what the days are sort of transpiring into. I've been here sequestered in my flat since March, and just, I've been working a lot, putting this record out, and I've been writing a lot, and I had a tour this summer that was sort of obviously not happening, which has been a bit of a drag, not only for me, but for most musicians who sort of are dependent on touring for any modicum of revenue in their world. So that's been a big change professionally, but it's allowed me to sort of stay in one place, which I've always sort of desired to have, but maybe not in this context. But I've been taking advantage of it, just really hunkering down and writing a lot, like a really large manuscript about music that I've been wanting to do for ages, for years.
Oh, so, like a book or something?
It could be a book, yeah. I mean, the manuscript title is Sonic Life, and I just sort of been writing about, what it is that sort of defines someone to dedicate themselves to the vocation of being a musician. And so through a personal lens, I write about just, what the documents were in the 1970s when I was a teenager. I turned 20 in 1978. So
happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry it's so late. I was only 1 year old when you turned 20, but still.
Well, I was a July baby, so
okay.
Yeah, my birthday this year was definitely a quarantine birthday.
Yeah.
No, it's just I was just really wanting to kind of essay about the signifiers, and like talking about like when a lot of these things, when you're at that age, when you're coming of age, when you're in your late teens, getting into your early 20s, that sort of influence and inform you and intrigue you into kind of what you want to do with your life. If you're so lucky to have such things happen to you, I wanted to write about what that meant. And so talking about through the lens of music, like in 1974, say, like when you send away and receive like that first 7-inch that Patti Smith made independently in New York City, and you knew her as just a rock writer, and like, what is this record this rock writer made, before she became such big news outside of New York. And and being like 17 years old and sort of receiving such an item in the mail and sort of what that meant, because it was rather catalytic to come across something like that.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to write at length about the nature of that and how it kind of not only influences you and defines a lot of your own aesthetic, but the culture as well, that you're interested in. Because the music culture at that time was so grandiose, with rock and roll being kind of a medium that extolled the virtues of wealth, and like even in glam rock, with Bowie and everybody, it was all about the champagne and the furs and the limousines and the
decadence.
The decadence, the Led Zeppelin and their private jet and all these kind of things.
Yeah. And
so to hear a record that was so minimal and so raw, and it sounded like it was recorded that afternoon, like in an hour, but it had such magic and beauty to it. It was like there was no frills. It was just a black 7-inch and a white sleeve that had her name scrawled across on the top, and you sent away for it through the mail, and there it was. And it was just this kind of this amazing record of this recitation of poetry that led into like a version of Hey Joe, and there's all these other aspects going on around this record, and you knew that it was connected to this community of other people in New York City, such as Lenny Kaye, who actually produced the record, and Tom Verlaine, who's actually playing a scratchy guitar on the record. You know about him because he's in a band called Television, who have yet to make a record, but they were written about by her in a magazine called Rock Scene, and they all have like really short chopped hair, and nobody in rock and roll has short hair. So all these things are kind of like I want to talk about these things,
I can see that. I mean, first of all, let me say I love Patti Smith a lot, and I've told the story a few times. I got to interview her in 2007, I want to say, and it's one of those things where the label is like, you got 20 minutes with Patti Smith. You know what? Now you got 15. Now you got 10. It was one of those things, But so I got on her. We finally got the call connected, and I had the 10 minutes, and the publicist jumped in. They're listening in. It's like the call is bugged. And they said, okay, you got to wrap this up. And Patti said, I really appreciate the respect you're showing me with these questions. They've got me running around here. give me your phone number and I'll call you later when I'm done all this stuff so I can give you more time. And I was like, what the hell? Like no one does that. So she hours later, we bonded because we were both really sick at the time, ironically, as we're speaking right now. Not that you and I are sick. We're fine. Are you okay? You all right? You all right there,
I'm
Thurston?
good. Yeah.
So she called me at my house like hours later and gave me like an hour. And it was one of the most beautiful things. You know, it really felt grounded and real. And that's what I think about her. And, you know, it's as you know, you and I have spoken many times now, like it's what drew me to you as well.
Yeah.
That authenticity. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. Secondly, in revisiting this time in the mid-'70s for you as a young person, what is this telling you about this moment now? And how far away are you today from that feeling of discovery and of joy with music? Can you elaborate upon that?
Well, a lot of it has to do with appreciating the actual fact that I am still engaged with discovery and being excited by discovery, and in any discipline, in creative impulse discipline, you know, be it music or visual art, cinema, what have you. Yeah. And so that to me that's not something that has intrinsically abetted at all. Possibly the dynamic of it has changed. In fact, it really has changed. There's been quite a few paradigm shifts in processing music. And in some real way, it's like talking about actual records and listening to records and how the effect they have at a young age. I don't feel like that is something experiential in my life so much anymore. And when I talk about records as these vibrational objects that mean so much in the context of like music that is primarily heard through the digital realm, to actually sort of be able to touch and smell, I find that those are the primary factors I'm most responsive to now, as opposed to actually listening to the record. So the listening experience has become secondary, if not tertiary, to what I get from music itself. It's like I'm kind of like I'm more attuned to just like the tactile gift item, and
like the tangible object. You mean?
Yes, because I talked to some young musicians. They always ask me about ways of getting people to hear their music, and I was like, well, you're lucky. I mean, you have these two realms. You have this digital realm and you have this physical realm that you can sort of work in, and that's a pretty new thing in the last couple of decades. But they have equal value, and to the point where if you could just use your own coin to make something without this idea of like making money back, but to actually sort of create something that is an exchange, a physical exchange that you could sort of hand off to somebody.
Yeah.
And give them your cassette or your CD or your record or your fanzine, or that's something you can't replicate at all in the digital realm. You can't download a record. You can download the content and the music and the numerical information of that music can come to you and you can sort of process it thus. But you can't download a record. You can't roll a joint on a digital download.
I'm sure someone can. I'm sure someone has figured out a way to do that. Absolutely. By this point, I am ordering records a lot, and they're coming to my house. But I haven't seen live music since March of 2020, and I've been telling people that I've been relatively okay with that. When people, because I am a show goer, I like to go and see shows once, twice a week, whatever I can. Raising a family, working, going to shows. However, I've said up until recently, I've been saying, yeah, I'm actually okay with it. I don't miss it. But now it's dawning on me that some of the stuff, like I'm thinking about some of my guests on my show, and a lot of that has been the result of discovering them live, getting behind something, and like that kind of discovery. You mentioned ordering a 7-inch and it's showing up and it feeling like discovery, but and you also said, like a lot of musicians who rely on that as live music as a form of income. That's one thing, but I actually think the exposure of seeing an opening band or what have you, like many of my favorite bands now that I think about it, I saw opening for someone else. And now,
yes.
So that is starting to hit me. Like beyond the experience of seeing you play, it's seeing whoever opens for you. You know, whoever
seeing something,
Yeah.
seeing something unexpected.
So that's really getting to me now that I realized it last week. Oh, wait a minute. Like, I pride myself on, seeing bands and figuring out, what they mean to me. And then, and that whole dynamic is currently gone.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because it is that unexpected experience that is so rewarding. And when I go out and hear music, when I was going out to hear music before we got clamped down, it was always pretty primarily to go hear free improvisation music. And because, especially here in London, where there's such a great history and lineage of like free improvisation as a, as a singular vocation for so many musicians, like they dedicate their musical lives to being free improvisers. And so I love going to hear these kind of concerts because even if I'm very familiar with the musicians themselves, what is going to happen at these concerts will always be rather unexpected. And I glean so much of that as far as like language and vocabulary in watching the musicians play. I completely miss that. And you're right about, just like when you go see a band play and there's somebody else on the bill who just kind of like knocks you out of your seat. There's nothing. That's so great. You're absolutely right. And those experiences can be few and far, but they can also happen quite regularly. I mean, it's how much you go out. Case in point, we, my partner, my girlfriend Eva, and I, we do book publishing, and we recently released a record by a local group here called Big Joni. Well, that came about because we went to see the X, the anarcho punk band from Holland, who've been around since like '89.
I love them. I've seen them. Seen them many times. Yeah. I love. Yeah, the X.
Really old friend.
Yeah,
the X are fantastic. Really old friends of mine, and they were in London. And I was like, well, let's go see the X. It was nearby, and it was at this venue. We went, and the support group was Big Joni. And we just stood there and were like, oh my God, this is fantastic. What a great band. Went up to them afterwards and said, do you have any merch? They had nothing. And then they were like, well, you guys should record a record. It's like, well, we did, but we haven't found a way to put it out yet. It's expensive and blah, blah. And the next thing I knew is like we had started a record label to put their record out. And we did. And, so that, case in point.
It's the lifeblood. It's what keeps us all as we get older. It is really what keeps us inspired, is seeing someone new or younger blow you away. And so, and everything that we get virtually is sort of mediated in some way. Like if you go see a band, that's it. There's no bullshit. Right. There's no one's telling you to I arguably the booker or the headliner has chosen this person or this entity, but at the same time, it really fuels me to keep going and keep loving music. And there's always something new and interesting. And I'm, I think I've said enough.
It really is.
It's really weird to not have that now. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the record world, it's kind of cool to see so many young labels, when I say young labels, like new labels in the last 10 years come up, where the intention of these labels is to uncover unreleased recordings or recordings that are just completely lost to time from different parts of the world. Yeah. And so there was this whole interest in finding like Zambian, like fuzz rock records, from Zambia from the early 70s. Yeah. Like even in the 70s, going into the 80s, when we were like all like doing whatever we were doing, nobody knew that there was like this kind of like hardcore, like Black Sabbath influenced mixed with James Brown, like fuzz rock scene happening in Zambia and Africa. Yeah. But there was, and they were making records and they never really got beyond the borders. And then all these years later, somebody sort of comes across some of these documents and they're just like, wow, this is incredible. And then it unleashes all these other lost recordings from that time period. And so you have these box sets of this music by these like disparate bands from this era. Who knew? And like, so those kind of things are happening all the time. So people are putting out like, here's some, late 60s, psychedelic Serbian band. It's like, what? It's like, it's like, what a service that some young entrepreneurs are putting these weirdo records out that sound really cool on their own dime,
There's so many imprints that do this, but are you kind of referring to things like Light in the Attic or Numero Group?
Sure. Completely.
Yeah. It is.
Those are the most high profile labels, but there's quite a few labels all over Europe that have been doing. There's a label called Cacophonic.
Yeah.
That have been like releasing and reissues and just sort of like recordings that just never saw the light of day.
Well, this impulse you have for discovery, I assume it holds you in good stead as you enter. I think there's the biographical information suggests. Why am I saying this? I know this. Sonic Youth started in 1980 or something like that.
Yes.
So you
start
right? Yeah, 40 years of music making for you. You clearly, based on this excellent new record By the Fire and all the work you do, writing, teaching, all these things, you are clearly spurred on by this impulse for discovery and to be inspired and to spread the word about things. I know you've probably talked about this many times. Do you have a sense of where that impulse comes from? Was it ordering that 7-inch and realizing, holy shit, here's this shit that no one talks about that I remember this distinctly, like just discovering punk for me was like, wait a minute, everything I've been reading up until this, hasn't been telling me about this whole universe. And so I feel like when we talk about Numero Group, Light in the Attic, these kinds of labels and your own work and working with Big Joni and all the stuff you do, you've got that in you. Do you know where it kind of comes from?
Well, certainly predated buying the Patti Smith 7-inch. I mean, I recall wanting to know what these images I would see in the furthest margins of rock magazines sounded like. So when I saw, early on in the 1970 or 69, 1970, being a kid and like being attracted to music literature, just sort of counterculture literature, I would buy Hot Rod magazine just because of just like the architecture of these hot rods was so rock and roll. And I was just like, wow, this is loud and noisy. And I would love to hear what this sounds like, or just like to, just be near one of these things. There was something really cool about that. But, I'm not like a car aficionado at all. I just sort of bought them because of the aesthetic and the energy. And so the energy of a lot of the rock magazines was really compelling. And so to look at images of somebody like Captain Beefheart with his top hat and his goatee, or that first image you see of Iggy Pop standing on the hands of the audience, spray painted silver, and you're just like, who is that? And what does that sound like? And these are subversive images, because I don't think anybody else is looking at that around me thinking the same thing. They're looking at Paul McCartney, or they're looking, they're looking at these kind of these other heroic iconography. I'm more interested in these kind of these oddities. What leads me into that, I don't know, because I'm living in a fairly safe domestic situation. It's not like I'm looking for perversity. Yeah, but I'm very attracted to the perverse, and it might be. I mean, my father was a music professor in a psychology, not psychology. He's more of a philosophy professor, and so we had a lot of art and music around our house. Maybe that's sort of what informed me to want to go deeper than just sort of what was happening in the mainstream.
I mean, to maintain that impulse though is fascinating, because as you get older, sometimes you can see the beauty in Paul McCartney eventually. You might have rejected it at one point, but as you get older, I don't know why that is. You just sort of like, you know what? I don't know. I was kind of reactionary, but now that I think about it, like clearly some of these people were pretty good at what they were doing, obviously, But
I never had, to me, yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, like, there's always sort of anti-main. I just think like, that anti-mainstream impulse can sometimes emerge from feeling like the mainstream was leading you astray or not giving you the big picture. And then when you kind of dig deeper, when you come out the other side, you can kind of see how the two things can coexist in your psyche, if that makes any sense. Like,
Yeah. I mean, there might have been an early feeling that maybe the mainstream it was a bit of a system of control over what was being proffered in the culture. But I think at that age, no, I mean, I certainly didn't have that kind of analysis, and I didn't really feel any animosity towards anything in the mainstream until the language of punk rock started coming out and saying like, well, we don't need the mainstream. And we also don't feel like we need to sort of have such a hierarchical distance from the audience and from the listenership. In fact, so when you had people like Joe Strummer saying, we are the audience and we're just jumping on stage, and that's the exchange. It's really cyclical, and we're sort of, and it's like there's an equal value between what we do and how the audience is expressing themselves. That really rang deep, and so that was quite different than the rock god of Robert Plant or whoever. And so it was this idea of just creating a cultural division, in time from punk rock onwards. And it was kind of curious. I always remember going back to my mother's house around 1979, and I would go visit my mother quite often, but I there was one point where I went down into the basement of her house in rural Connecticut, an hour and a half away outside of Manhattan, where I had been living. And I was just 20 years old, and I went down in her basement, and there was a Peaches record store crate full of record albums that I had before 77, 76, 77.
Yeah.
And it was Led Zeppelin and Iron Butterfly and Allman Brothers Band and Peter Frampton, Jay Giles Band, you name it. There was just a bunch of records in there, and they were kind of moldy. And I stood for a second looking at them, and it sent a bit of a shiver through me, because I realized at that moment that I had completely eradicated them from my consciousness. I had forgotten about them.
Wow.
They were actually moldy dinosaurs sitting in the basement. And I remember looking at the kind of hoary aspect of them and just thinking like, wow, that was just a completely another time and space, in the world for me. And what was it, like 2 years prior? It wasn't that long ago, but so much had happened in a bit of a revolution culturally in the scene for me, that this plethora of documents had come through for the last couple of years, just pushing things in different ways. All this new language, and a lot of it was about like stepping away from this previous culture of music.
Yeah.
That I remember looking at that, and then years later, when a band like Black Flag started referencing pre-76 punk and taking on Deep Purple and Black Sabbath, and bringing this kind of vibe into their music and growing their hair out, like they weren't like punk rock skinhead kind of boys, and they started growing their hair out and like talking about music that was kind of off limits and reintroducing it and reappreciating it. And I remember being really excited by that. It's like, oh great, I can go reappraise JoJo Gunn now or something. and that became more prevalent through the 80s into the 90s, where it's like it was like there was this reappraisal of this connectivity between punk culture and 60s radicalism.
Yeah.
And it was in a way the early 70s kind of leapfrogged over the 60s with glam rock and Bowie and Mark Bolan and T-Rex, and this kind of putting on this kind of, a lot of their music was sort of like this kind of 50s kind of purist rock and roll kind of action that they would kind of glam up, with like these kind of, and it was really trying to divorce itself from the hippie country, rural, embracing Crosby, Stills, and Nash and Young on the rickety porch, and the James Taylor and the boat with the dog, and the paddle, and out in the country. And it's like, so glam was not that. Glam was all about like, no, we're like in supersonic jets, and we come out of this, the ideas of the 50s, vision of the future,
Yeah.
That was always curious to me. And then into the 80s, it was like, no, let's reappraise the profundity of the 60s. That was big. And I think that really actually sort of was like a big paradigm shift for a lot of what was radical about punk rock was that letting down that guard right then.
Let me propose a theory about this and tell me what you make of it. What if you reject, because when you're rejecting like older music or the decadent music, you're like, it depends on the time you're rejecting it, of course, but you're kind of rejecting a time, an era almost. And it might be your parents' era, if you will, like the music your parents might have liked. That can be, or your older, in my case, it was my older cousins, and that can be foundational. And so you kind of get into it, and then you kind of reject it. Like you're rejecting a part of yourself, which is your parents. And then as you get older, I think some of us start to relate a bit more to our parents, and then their stuff, whatever they liked, you develop a weird affection for it. So when you talk about Black Flag coming out, hardcore punk band, then sort of seeing the orthodoxy going on and people saying, oh, you can't have long hair, you can't do this, you can't do that. They kind of start to be like, well, no, then the real punk rock thing is to grow your hair out and be like those scuzz, the metal, the Led Zeppelin, whatever. Is there something going on there where you're, because I'm asking you this too, because you seem to be in working on your manuscript, which sounds almost like it could be a memoir. You're reflecting upon all of this a little bit, like where you came from. Yeah. So do you think there's something that you reject something that seems old and not cool, and then you realize, well, actually it all feeds into everything. We're all kind of feeding, constantly, cyclically feeding into each other in our expression. Does that make any sense?
Certainly when you get older and you realize the world isn't just sort of this kind of insular community that you've sort of like aligned yourself with, it makes sense. I remember going to see Black Flag when they started doing these moves and growing their hair out. And right then, like they played a gig in New York and all the bald head kids were there.
Yeah.
And Henry wasn't bald anymore. He had hair down to his shoulders. He looked like Jesus Christ. And these kids were yelling, cut your hair, cut your, like that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Henry just sort of stood there. And I always remember him. He had nothing on but his sweat shorts. And he reached down and pulled little Henry out and said, I'll grow my hair. He said, I'll grow my hair down to here before I satisfy you.
Right.
That to me kind of like it shut everybody up. This is like, he was saying I'm autonomous. And it's like the one aspect of where we come from as a music culture is that recognition of autonomy.
But those signifiers of time and fashion, as you and I are speaking in October of 2020, aren't they all gone? You can have a shaved head. You can have long hair. It doesn't really connote anything. Like it doesn't.
Yes.
Everyone made a big fuss about those kids who sounded like Led Zeppelin a year or two ago. And yeah, they were aping that fashion. Like it was like your high school smoking section came to life and made a band or something. But at the same time, I'm like, yeah, but if I saw that person walking down the street beside a punk, beside a metal kid, beside a hip hop kid, it all kind of just makes sense to me now. It's like we don't have that orthodoxy anymore. Would you agree?
No, I do agree.
Yeah.
And, a lot of it, to answer your question just before about the idea of rejection towards the identity of what your parents represented, a lot of it wasn't so much rejection. It was just about, actually, for me, was this idea of just creating an identity that was in more rejection to following what had gone before, like just not wanting to be, not so much what your parents were, but what your older siblings were.
Yeah.
It was just like, so that was really what was so defining about that time, was just like, because people of my age, coming of age in the late 70s, embracing that identity. And it was a minority. I mean, we were a minority in a way. We were a loud minority. And it became very sort of, when Johnny Carson would make jokes about the Sex Pistols as when they were touring across the USA in 78, that was really jarring, because it's like any mention of punk rock culture on TV was, at that time, did not exist. And here was this band that was really, they barely got mentioned in Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
And here they were overseas, and they were playing to these audiences that would be people like us, but it was like, it got hyped, and they got hyped in the mainstream just by being coming out of Johnny Carson's mouth at the time. It's like, that's, making fun of the names like Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious.
Right,
very easy to make jokes about.
Yeah.
And kind of like have the audience laugh along with like these silly kids, with these names. But people came out to see what all the hoopla was, and it was just, it was a disaster. And so, unfortunately it was a disaster.
Yeah.
It's too bad, because, the truth of the matter is, amongst all of the hype that was presented was a document. And that document was their album, their one and only Nevermind the Bollocks album, which is to this day an impeccable record of just, it's magnificent. It's like the songwriting, the execution, the performance, the whole design of it, everything about it is like, it's one of the few really impeccable recordings that are in the lineage of rock and roll music. And so that alone will always be its mainstay, regardless of any of the other situations around that band. It's like they created something that was like as profound as that. So
some pretty prototypical trolling there too. That whole band and the way it was designed, like all the stunts and the cursing and the everything about it was, when I think about it now, and now more recently, Johnny Rotten walking around in a Make America Great Again shirt for some was really jarring, but for some of us, like, no, this is like one of the earliest contemporary trolls, Johnny Rotten.
Yeah.
Constantly provoking you to be angry or take the contrarian view. That's trolling. And they kind of were, McLaren, all of them, they kind of seemed to be about that. So yeah, it's weird. Like, we were kind of manipulated, but anyway, that's a whole other conversation. We don't have a lot of time. Give me your number. You'll call me later. We're talking a little bit about identities. And I know that some people are, when they hear By the Fire, this new record by you and your band, they're seeing this duality of, Thurston's letting his, improvisational freaky side intermingle more with his pop hooks kind of side. What do you make of these characterizations, and how would you characterize the music on this record?
Well, I think I never really sort of thought about it being so explicit on this record, where my interest in free improvisation was coming into some kind of hybrid notion of composition. I think that's something that's happened quite a bit in the past. And so I never thought of that as being anything new. So I don't think that wasn't part of the making of this record. In fact, I think there's probably less examples of free improvisation on this recording than previous recordings. I don't think we really sort of jam out so much. There's some long pieces of music on it, but they're completely composed. There's compositions. In fact, I don't think there's one piece on this double album that is employing improvisation. But that said, I glean a lot of musical ideas from improvisation. And of course, songwriting for me is usually comes out of a place of improvisation of my own. Just when I sit down on a couch with a guitar and I'm just improvising, and then I hear things, and then sometimes I will coalesce into like a song concept.
Well, when people hear or see track listings where songs are, longer than usual, I think they're picking up on the freedom that you're obviously, like, these songs exemplify how free you feel to do whatever you want. And I think within that, people will connect that to your penchant for improvisation. But to your point, I think it's free. It feels very free and
right.
free of pop convention, yet, choruses, hooks. It's stuff you've been doing for many years. I know that, but I've just been reading some stuff about what people make of it. And I've also been reading your thoughts about some of the songs and how they relate to freedom. So maybe improvisation I sometimes interchange improv with freedom because I think they're very deeply connected.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's interesting because there is a freedom right now that I find there's a balance between the freedom that we have with technology, where music can exist through the internet now, where there's no strictures, there's no restrictions, And I was talking to one of the musicians on this record is John Lydecker, who is involved with Negative Land, and he records under the name Wobbly, and he plays some electronics on this record, and he's very engaged with a lot of composers who do a lot of long form drone composition, pieces that can go from 1 hour to 100 hours if they want it to be.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and thinking about how these pieces now can exist on the internet for anybody who cares to investigate or listen to this music, they can. And the composer is now free to have this music exist without the restrictions of the format imposed by
vinyl records or what have you.
By vinyl records, what have you.
Yeah.
The CDs, what have you.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like, that's a balance, because it's like, I like that idea, but I also do like definition and I do like the strictures of a record. I like the idea that you can fit 17 minutes comfortably on the side of a record.
Yeah.
And you work within that context, you work within that forum, and that defines a lot of how you actually compose. And to have all shackles off and to think like, well, I can just play until my heart's content is a little. I also find it slightly self-indulgent and a bit irresponsible. And so when I actually recorded, I put a triple CD set out last year of basically just 3 pieces because they could only fit on CDs. But I really worked on them as compositions. I felt like I want to make a long form composition, but I don't want to have it be where I'm spinning wheels or I'm just sort of droning out or just taking up time with sound, for the sake of doing so. I really wanted every moment to actually have a logical connection to the moments before and after. Yeah. And so it would be this musical escapade. And that was really important. And so when I recorded those pieces, I knew that they would be, you're asking a listener to sort of to settle down for 60 minutes. And in this day and age, that's very difficult. But I did it anyway, just as an exercise, because the format of the CD allowed me to. And so I kind of was telling people afterwards, it's like, well, the next project I'd like to do is a 24-hour composition in a sense where it's like, it's really like a composition that moves through 24 hours from 12 midnight to the next 12 midnight. Yeah. And it's something I would love to do, but it's just because it's kind of fun and it's kind of a challenge. And it's just like, it's an experience, and it's like, but I like having, being able to sort of, it's not good to record on anything more than a C90, because then your sound quality will suffer, and the tape can break. I like having these things be the the boundaries to work within. I have no problem with that. So in that respect, when I was making By the Fire, I was thinking really about how music could be sequenced on 2 albums in a way that sounded like a concise statement of purpose and intention.
2 albums?
Well, 2. There's 2. It's a double album.
Right. Oh, I see what you're saying.
So it's a single CD, but right. I'm thinking in side breaks.
Right. Okay.
And to think in side breaks, it allowed me to sort of like, okay, this this is a 12-minute piece. This is almost a whole side. But if I have this 4-minute piece, it's sort of like it's like almost like it's creating a collage of sorts, but with a narrative intention. And so I that all came into play when I was like putting this record together. And I think it probably would have come into play quite differently if I just sort of said, oh, I don't care how it exists, and it can just like be as long as it wants to be, and things can just stretch out. I'm a great enthusiast of economy. It's like the Minutemen were one thing, but just the economy of punk rock tunage is something I always want to sort of pay tribute to. I mean, the first two songs are rather economical. I mean, I think they don't really break the 4-minute mark too much. And so I wanted those to exist, and I wanted to have this story go into starting out with these kind of joyful sonic nuggets and going into this more contemplative pieces of music that I solely played, and then going into these darker, longer experimental guitar pieces, into this last piece of music that was just all instrumental and was this kind of exercise in investigating the properties of the guitar tuning we were working with this 12-string.
Yeah.
And hearing it as it slowly shifted and expanded into this amorphous sound, and then sort of went into this kind of melodious sort of cloud, and just sort of dispersed at the end, and with some sense of hope and some sense of like glory, And so it was kind of an emotional statement I was making, and I wanted it to be political. I wanted it sort of like to go out there as a record of kind of intelligent noise, where there's so much kind of like inane noise in the chatter sphere that we kind of have been living in for too long.
Yeah.
So it's like and I found that to be, as a social engagement, entirely political. So
well, it feels pointed and artful, and as it's come out, to be honest, I've been, as we're speaking, the Sonic Youth album Washing Machine just celebrated a 25th anniversary. And I don't know, this really, so I spent a good day or so just revisiting Washing Machine, which much to the chagrin of some Sonic Youth fans that I know, I'll say, well, I think that's my favorite. And they'll say, what are you, nuts? What about, Daydream Nation and Evolve? It's just, I'm like, yeah, I know. It means a lot to me. And this, they're not similar, but it brought me back to it. Your Record, By the Fire, a little bit. It brought me back to that era. And that era, I think that was a significant time for the band from 95 on. And
very much so. Very much so.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting exploration in terms of what we're talking about. Pop, stretching things out, letting things breathe, and freedom.
Well, there were decisions that were made at a time when we had such a profile where it was, I think the encouragement was to be more streamlined and to maybe follow the signals that you were hearing on alternative rock radio, which was Stone Temple Pilots and such. Mm-hmm. And that just wasn't going to happen. In fact, it was actually reactionary to that to some degree. And so it's been interesting to sort of see that in retrospect.
Yeah. The Sonic Youth Live series seems to be a going concern. How involved are you in all that stuff?
Not so much. I mean, Steve Shelley has been really administering it mostly, and he's been sort of keeping the rest of the group in his discoveries of everything. That's what he's really been doing this whole summer. We've all been doing different things, obviously. It's coming out of that band, but that's what he's been doing, and it's been incredible. Like, he's been just sort of uncovering the different documents and listening through to them and to see which ones he thinks have, enough, value to sort of distribute. And he runs it by everybody, and we all take a listen. Like, sounds good, Steve. Go for it. Let's put it out there.
Put it up on the Bandcamp, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Steve is the one who created that Bandcamp. For these things to sort of exist on, and so that's been his work.
It's always the drummer, I'm a drummer in most of the bands, so we always have to do everything. We have to do everything in the end. You just get everything organized. It's really interesting. I had something going on with drummers, but all this to say, we don't have a lot of time left, so I want to ask you, Thurston, to if you want to direct people to more information about you and By the Fire, first of all, where would you like to send them on the internet?
The record is available through our site, Daydream Library. And you could also, the manufacturer distributor of the record here is Cargo. So Cargo Records is good to go to. In the USA, Forced Exposure will be distributing the record.
Okay.
So they can find the record there.
And you're on stuff. You're on Instagram and all those things.
Yeah, man. I'm all out there, man. To me, By the Fire to me was all about the technology that we have for communication, especially for a time like this where we're being asked not to sort of come near each other.
Yeah, we're disconnected and you're connecting. Yeah.
To me, this is our campfire that we're talking around and passing the talking stick around.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
So that was the illusion.
Okay. No, I think that makes sense. It's very poetic, actually. If there's a song from this record that we can go out on, play for people right now, Thurston, which one would you pick and why?
I would pick the song called Locomotives.
Okay. Why did that come to mind?
Because it kind of encapsulates a lot of what I'm really interested in moving towards as songwriting. Taking these very sort of kind of intensified sonic guitar moments and having them work in the value of a quote unquote proper song format, as opposed to just sort of being sort of sound escapades, and having both those things kind of come into a unified place as a piece of music. So that song is sort of where I feel is like a leaping off song into what I want to really sort of get into next.
Crossing borders, we don't see destination foreign and free. We're talking about freedom here.
That's right.
And I appreciate that. By the way, who is Radio?
Oh.
It says here, music by Thurston Moore, lyrics throughout the record, lyrics by Radio. What is that? What is that, Thurston?
A poet, filmmaker, artist, good friend. Since I've lived in London, done a lot of work together, and I really got into the idea of collaborating with a poet as a lyricist.
I see.
And in the same way that I would collaborate, say, with the guitar player or Deb Googe, the bass player, or whatever. I'm just like, this is essentially collaborative action, and I bring in the structure, I bring in the song, and then I have these musicians playing with me for their skill set. Yeah. And so they create their music. And I thought the idea of working with the lyrics in the same way as the music is really cool, in the way that Grateful Dead worked with Robert Hunter.
Yeah. So did Dylan, actually. Yeah.
Yes. So that to me, that's why I've been liking doing it, and I've been loving what Radio has been giving, because it's really sensitive to just the contemporary emotional life that I feel like we have, and so that's what's going on there.
Okay, this all sounds very mysterious. I'm not sure if I totally trust it in this age of weird information, but here's Thurston Moore with Locomotives from the excellent new record, By the Fire. Thurston, thank you so much for your time again, and I wish you the best luck with everything in the future.
Yeah, man. I hope we get to meet again.
You know, the last time Thurston Moore was on this show, the date was September 13th, 2013, episode 35. And now we're at episode 577, and he's back. Took a while, didn't it? It did take it took a little while to have him back, but it was great. Thank you, Thurston Moore, for being on this, the 577th episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available on everything, everywhere you get podcasts. If you like what you've heard and you're listening to it on some kind of platform that you use, hit subscribe or follow or whatever. Please stay in tune with the show. And it's always updating. There's always new episodes, and there's lots of old episodes. And so whatever you're using right now, whether that's Apple, Google, Spotify, or what have you, please follow, subscribe to the show. If you can't find an episode that you've heard about, like episode 35 with Thurston Moore, if you heard about an episode and it's not in the podcast feeds, or if you want to learn more about me and sign up for my regularly scheduled newsletter, please visit my website, vishkhanna.com. You can also like Creative Control on Facebook or follow the show on Twitter at vishcreative, or follow me directly at vishkhanna. Also, please visit patreon.com/creative control to make a flexible monthly donation to keep this podcast going. Had a nice influx of donors come in. We've lost some too. That's just the way it works with monthly flexible donations. But I appreciate all of the donations. And $6 or more gets you access to exclusive audio content, which I did not provide in the month of October 2020 because I put out 9 episodes of the show, and there's only supposed to be 4 a month. So I figured you had enough of me and my guests to hear from, but I will begin putting up some more exclusive audio content very soon. So go to patreon.com/creative control to access that stuff and also to support the show financially. Thanks again to live@masseyhall.com, where you can watch beautifully captured concerts by great Canadian artists. Also Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, and Granddad's Donuts in Hamilton for their in-kind support for this show. Thanks as always to my friend, my brother from another mother, if you will, Jim Guthrie. He lets me use some music on the show that he made, and you can learn more about Jim and the music he makes at jimguthrie.org. And finally, thank you. Thank you very much for listening to this episode with Thurston Moore. I hope you enjoyed it. As I said earlier, I hope you will consider following the show however you wish to do that. And if not, please do that, first of all. And then also tell your friends about the show. That helps. Recommend the show. You see those lists where people say, hey, can anybody recommend a podcast? And then I look at them and then I cry for 3 hours because no one mentions the show. Well, not no one. Sometimes people mention the show, but still, recommend the show. Like the show. Like me. It's very needy at the end of the show nowadays. I don't know why. I'm all, stir crazy, and I don't see people, and I don't know how people feel about me, and it's really confusing. But I'm sure you like me, and I like you, so thank you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now. And thanks for the extra time. Sorry we went late.
That's all right.
And I really love talking to you. I miss you. I'm glad you're making music. And
same here, man.
I was just telling our friend Sean that the last time I think I saw you was in Hamilton, Ontario, when you played a little show. And I told you that you were like, I really want Indian food. And I said, well, my mom, she's 45 minutes away, and you seem dead serious. You're like, let's go there now.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I was like, I got to host this stage. Are you sure you want to? You wouldn't let it go, and I thought that was funny. So anyway.
Well, I mean, maybe if they allow us to cohabitate again, and we're in that same situation, If you could take me to your mom's for some Indian food.
Yeah, I would be happy
Whoa.
to do it. It's a regret. I should have been like, fuck this stage. Let's just go.
Yeah.
I
think so too.
I actually moved. I live in Edmonton, Alberta now. So we're further away from my parents, which sucks, but
Yeah.
it's all bad. But anyway, yes, if we're ever in the same spot and my mom can make you food,
Yeah, man.
definitely happening.
We'll do an exchange. What is she like?
She's not, what is she like? I don't know. Just Indian movies and gossip. Do you have any gossip?
Okay, I have some gossip. I'll give her some gossip. I know about Indian movies.
Soap operas, Indian soap operas, gossip. That's mostly what she likes. Yeah, and she wants me to shave my beard, and maybe you can just cut my hair for me. And
there we go. Maybe
Yeah.
we could do that. We could do like a beard shaving, like pre-dinner ritual. Oh yeah,
Absolutely.
that sounds good.
Absolutely.
Sounds like good times.
all right, well, thanks again, and I'll put this out soon. And thank you. I appreciate it.
Right on, Vish.
Okay, talk to you soon.
Cheers, man.
Okay, bye bye.
Okay, peace.
Peace.